Hello, everyone. I'm Meg Rotzel, Curator of Exhibitions at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. Welcome to today's opening program for the exhibition, The Place Where the Creek Goes Underground, created as a collaboration between Anthony Romero, Deanna, Ledezma, and Josh Rios. Today's presentation features Anthony Romero with Roberto Bedoya, the Cultural Affairs Manager for the City of Oakland, and Kade Twist, an artist and member of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma and Associate Professor at Otis College of Art and Design. And I want to warmly welcome each of them and acknowledge Anthony's collaborators, Deanna, Ledezma, and Josh Rios in the audience. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long while. The exhibition that opens today in our gallery gathers objects, videos, family photographs, sound, and writings to reflect on the complexity of kinship as related to place. You'll encounter natural materials like gravel, cedar leaves, and a living rosemary plant, all referencing the land that I expect Anthony, Kade, and Roberta will address. This exhibition also features a broadsheet available to take away from the exhibition that situates the material and ideas that appear in the gallery. And I'm going to take a moment to quote from the broadsheet as a way to situate today's discussion and let Anthony introduce the ideas that are the ground that the installation emerges from. Quote, in the case of this exhibition, place is overlapping. On the one hand, there is the sovereignty of the Massachusetts lands, Harvard Radcliffe Institute, and Harvard University. On the other are the places we are working from, including the distinct yet adjacent regions we grew up in, South Central Texas, the Gulf Coast, and the Texas Hill Country, as well as our recent and distant ancestral migrations from Coahuila and San Luis Potosí, Mexico, unquote. I begin with that excerpt to reinforce that the land and what remains unseen is present in the gallery, and we invite you to visit the collective work of Anthony, Deanna, Ledezma, and Josh Rios to deepen what I expect to be a special conversation with Roberto and Kade. And now I'd like to give you an overview of what we'll do with the next hour. First, Anthony will lead a conversation with Roberto and Kade. Then we'll take a break to see the slideshow again, followed by audience Q&A. Since I know we have a very engaged audience, I expect a lot of questions as always. So please use the Q&A feature on the app, and we ask that you keep your questions short, and that will increase the likelihood that we can address as many as possible in the time that we have. And I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the members of the Radcliffe Institute Leadership Society, our annual donors, and the Johnson-Kulukundis Family Endowment Fund for the Arts, whose generosity keeps Radcliffe programming free and open to the public. And we thank you. And now I'll turn the virtual floor over to Anthony Romero.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Before I begin, I want to take a moment to thank you, Meg, Caitlin Rubin, and Joe Zane for all of your incredible work and support and really thoughtfulness as we crafted this exhibition. I also want to thank our designer, Carrie Buzel, for her design work. You've all been incredible collaborators, and I'm very grateful for it. Thank you also to Kade and Roberto for agreeing to visit with me today. We'll dive a little bit more into that shortly. Lastly, I have to thank Deanna Ledezma and Josh Rios. You're my family, and this resurgent work just isn't possible without y'all. It is my pleasure to be joining you from Massachusetts lands. My name is Anthony Romero. Some of you may know Romero is the Spanish word for rosemary, an important medicinal plant for my mother. This is how my thinking for the exhibition begins. This exhibition, The Place Where the Creek Goes Underground, is an iteration of what Josh and Deanna and I refer to as kinship research. You could also think of it as a kind of collective memoir. There's much more to say about that and about our collective work together, and I hope that you'll be able to join us for the publication release in November, where we will speak much more directly to our work. But for today, for my part, I will emplace myself in the Texas Hill Country, where my family has lived for many generations. We are indigenous to the Texas-Mexico border and have lived and moved between South Central Texas and Northern Mexico for as long as we have been in this world. My mother was a curandera, traditional healer of the borderlands, as was her mother. And in March of 2020, as the world came to a stop, it was these traditions that brought my mother and I together and set me on the path which leads through this exhibition. For the next 2 years, I would have the privilege of learning from Abuelita Marica Alvarado, a Lipan Apache elder who knew my mother's medicine and taught me not just the how of our traditions, but the why. Or as Abuelita would say, many of our families remember what to do, but we don't remember why we do it. I would spend countless hours on Zoom with Abuelita and others as we shared knowledge together. It was during these gatherings that I first learned of Tesla's expanding footprint in Texas and its impact on the land, water, and local communities, including the Tesla Gigafactory just outside of Austin, which paved over 2,100 acres of medicinal and ceremonial plants. In the years that followed, I would watch from the outside as Indigenous and climate activists would work tirelessly to resist the SpaceX building along the Gulf, the Enbridge pipeline, and an ever-widening constellation of Amazon warehouses and logistics centers. Many of these images are included in the exhibition, including the impact of Amazon development on the land surrounding my parents' home. As for my mother, her and my father would become ever more anxious about their dwindling water supply and the impact of overdevelopment on an already precarious electric grid. It was with all of this swirling in my head that I first reached out to Kade and asked if we could visit together. I wanted to understand how tradition, place, and land and peoples could be folded into my practice. But in order to understand what I was really asking, I wanted to hear how others were doing that. And Kade was kind enough to have a conversation with me over the phone. And it was in that conversation that he suggested I reach out to Roberto. It was Roberto who would tell me the story that has since become a kind of guiding star for the work I was doing and am continuing to do with Josh and Deanna. The story goes like this. In every city or town, there is a creek. In every creek, there is a place where it goes underground. That place may still be accessible, or it may be paved over. It may be a parking lot, or a hospital, or a set of condos. Somewhere in that city or town, there is someone who remembers that place, the place where the creek goes underground. And with that, I want to welcome Kade and Roberto to the conversation. As I said, it's an honor and a pleasure to be joined by you both. Your words and practices have been instrumental, not just in the development of this exhibition, but my practice over the last year and a half. So I thought we would begin by just asking each of you to introduce yourselves, introduce your work and the places that you're coming from as it relates to some of the core ideas of the exhibition: placekeeping, kinship, and belonging. And Kade, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and inviting me to participate. I really appreciate it. It's interesting to think about these things together because I think the three of us, we share so much. So this is going to be interesting because people are going to get a multiplicity perspective of perspectives on these issues that are closely related. So it's really nice, really great experience. But in terms of like dealing with these issues as you frame in your first question, I think that's one of the reasons why we organized Post-Commodity, was to take Indigenous discourses in the arts away from object making and into the issues that are at the center of the dilemmas of land and people, resource management and sovereigns, and the complexity of states and counties and federal and tribal jurisdictions as they intersect land. We wanted to try to frame that in a way that wasn't being done at the time. And we continue to do that today. I think the idea we are after in our work relates solely to that, not solely, but significantly to the concept of kinship. Kinship as a system, kinship as a promise, kinship as a connector of past, present, and future through pedagogical, ceremonial, and cultural practices, as well as familial practices. Both exist in that space. Both frame the land. Both remind us of what's at stake. And that's where we really like to be. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Roberto?
Well, first of all, thank you, Anthony. I love being here. I love Kade. I love working with Post Commodity on a variety of different activities, and I'll refer to that later. So place, I think, and Anthony, I love your story about mom, because I got mama stories up the yin. So, so where do my place is in the fog and redwood trees and in the desert in the Sonoran heat. Let me tell you the story. I grew up in the Bay. My dad's from Arizona, Tucson, and we'd be driving down from the Bay to see family in the border. And in the car, they would be joking, my parents, and they'd be joking about the definition of God's country. And mom would say, it's the redwoods, it's the fog. And today I'm in Oakland in the fog. And dad would say, no, it's saguaro, it's saguaro cactus, it's the heat, it's the dirt. So that's my place, man. It's in the dirt and in the fog. It's in the heavens and it's on the ground. And I think about that in the context of a wonderful complexity sovereignty. Kate and I had talked an awful lot over the years about the sovereignty of context, and I wrote something about that for the work he did on the border, the repellents fence, and in the exhibition in Canada. But so kinship, belonging are all close topics to me in my reflections and in the work I do. I am the cultural affairs manager for the city of Oakland, and our cultural plan is called Belonging in Oakland. So I think about belonging an awful lot, not the psychology of belonging, but the sociology. How do we belong to a site, to a place, to relation, as opposed to relationships? And I can talk a little bit further about that, but that belonging to relation is a form of kinship. That's it, Anthony. Back to you.
Yeah. I want to circle back to how do we belong to relation, but maybe first, because, Kate, I feel like this has come up in previous conversations that we had. And Roberto, you just laid it out nicely with your story. But, Deanna and Josh and I are invested in what we're thinking about as kinship-based research. And what that is for us in relationship to the place that we're from is how we think about our family's knowledge of the land, of living on the land in relationship to, the constellation of things that make up that place, right? Like not just Amazon encroachment and extractive industries and all of that, but everything else, culture and cowboys and rodeos, and mesquite trees and all of that stuff. So I'm wondering for y'all how you think of, this. I guess I want to frame it as either like how you think of this question of place-based knowledge, either through the lens of your own kind of kinship networks or with the communities that you're engaging with, which you may or may not have that kind of sense of kinship with yet.
Do I go first with that?
Sure. Yeah, we keep the same order.
Okay. I think this is a really important issue. And this is something that post-commodity has been trying to tackle since, throughout our art practice. It came into a particular type of focus during Repellent Fence. And we've been trying to build on that. And we've developed a research project that that's become a performative art project that, people can focus on their relationship with land. And like with Cosmovision, it's a sonic instrument that people gather around to perform collectively. The participants use field recordings that they take and develop a line drawing to be a generative compositional format, like a graphic score. But these graphic scores are built on their symbolic relationship with the land. So they have to break down their relationships to the land in meaningful ways to the level of the symbol. And then we start engaging in symbolic exchange, which is another way of having a deeper dialogue that goes deeper than just simple words. Because metaphors and symbols are things that have to be negotiated. They have to be positioned. They have to be embodied. And the process of doing that takes you deeper into the conceptual complexity of what you are engaging in through that symbolic exchange. That's the essence of all ceremonies that humans engage in. All ceremonies are, really pedagogical endeavors that pass down knowledge to place and land and culture and community. So we're trying to bring a metaphorical relationship to land into dialogues that have existed maybe without that support. So our goal is to take this instrument, which uses a video game type of interface, and it uses a type of granular synthesis process that enables the players to manipulate 10 seconds of an audio clip into a 10-minute piece, music piece, But what we're trying to do with that is to go throughout the Western Hemisphere, from the tip of South America to the tip of Canada over the next 10 years, and have community dialogues without worrying about arts institutions or their funding mechanisms. This is really independent of the art world and their desires. This is really about our work as Indigenous people in this hemisphere and wanting to connect to people and just know how do they think about the land? How are we thinking about the land in this hemisphere? What do we as Americans, as in people who are Indigenous to this hemisphere, what do we think about who we are in relationship to our land, independent of politics and violence and the genocides and all the negativity that we have been disciplined to focus on? How do we think generatively about the land beneath our feet and tell stories with it, make meaning with it, use it as a pedagogical tool? So that's what we're really after. And that's probably 25 years of art making that led us to this point. And it's right where you're at. I mean, it is a system of inquiry and recovery and sharing that is very much located within your practice. And that's why I'm so excited about this really special relationship we all have here.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Roberto?
A couple of different things. Two things. Kade talked about ceremony and ritual. Have had the pleasure to see his performances. And I think about, again, storytelling. When we go down to see my tia in Tucson, we also went around Easter time, so we would go see the deer dance ceremony at the Old Pasqua, the Yaqui. So, as a kid, I saw ceremony. I thought, like, what the hell is this? These kids look like me. And we kind of figured it out. Well, they are kind of like you. But what I realized about that ceremony when I studied it is about the flower world and the power of the flower world. And I leap to this reflection that all of you have been talking about relationships, which are cool, but I think about relation. And I try to make the distinction between the two. And I think about the Martinique scholar, Eduardo Glissant, who talks about the poetics of relation. And why I like relation better than relationship, so I use both words. Relationship becomes transactional. I stand in relation to the skies and to the land and to my cousins so that's a stronger word for me. So I just need how do the kids do it? Anyway, I just need to know that. So in my egghead ways, I think about relations and how that is a powerful way to be in the world, to understand especially the power of land and the power of how we imagine our lives together on the land. So I'm a policymaker. So I can get poetics around my policy making, and I do, and they just kind of like roll their eyes, and that's good. But it's like, so that is a form of policy making, is a form of understanding kinship. And by that, I mean, for example, let me just a little footnote that with a story. There's this dancer, a native dancer named Emily Johnson, and she based in New York, but she's from Alaska. And we were talking about policy and policy making and art funding and all that nonsense. And she says, when I ask for money, I create a line item called my kinship fund. So I said, oh, that's brilliant. Let's unravel and trouble the form. What happens when you fill out an application and you write in kinship and you put 25K? Because you got to pay people. You got to feed people. You got to sing. You got to dance. That's all kinship. And put that in your budget. And let philanthropy kind of be bothered by it. I mean, anyway, that's enough. I'll shut up for a moment.
Thank you very much for that, because I actually was going to follow up with asking y'all about this distinction between relationship and relation. So I appreciate you bringing that to the table. And Kate, I'm wondering if you have thoughts about that.
Well, I mean, we have a slight different take. I believe in the word relationship as not including transaction. To me, that word takes my mind somewhere else. So when I think of in relation and relationship, I think they are in service of each other and doing similar things. So I don't have any great insight, but I do appreciate that, because that's really the critical understanding that we're sharing here, is that we need to get beyond transactional relationships and move to more substantial relations. I like that, and I'm going to start using that. And when I'm talking with students, this is at the core of everything that I teach. Is so many students are concerned with the thing, but the thing has no meaning in and of itself. The thing is always defined by its relationships and what it is in relation to, and so I'm always trying to get the conversation here. And I think that type of thinking is outside of theory. And going back to your core issue here of experiential knowledge, really versus theoretical knowledge, is theoretical knowledge has gotten out of hand. Theory has just gotten way, way out of hand. It's become incredibly complex metaphysical endeavor that seems to rationalize anybody's particular not relationship, but everybody's self-declared interest outside of the relationship, and very much getting into the transactional way of thinking. So most theory, I see transactional language and ideas in a presence. So I think it's really important for people, if they want to read theory, God bless them. I mean, there's nothing wrong with reading and learning and thinking about complexity, but don't be afraid to apply your own family's logic, your own community's logic, and build upon those ideas of theory making with real world practice. It will help balance your endeavors. I sincerely believe that.
Yeah,
When
thanks.
couple
ahead.
of things. When post-commodity repellent fence, it was a beautiful, beautiful moment. The balloons in the sky, the desert on the border, it was just so much power there. And in a way, talk about theory and practice. How do you theorize practice and practice theory? And so that's the mambo I kind of like to drive down that lane. But Anthony, a little story for you that's related to ancestors. So I work here with a group of artist collective called Kingmakers in Oakland. It's basically a cultural mentorship program for Black and brown boys. And they're cool. They're really great. But when they talk about AI, they're intentional. It's ancestor intelligence. So can we park the other AI out and let the market take care of it? And can we erase that other meaning of AI and go to ancestor intelligence? Because you telling your story about your mama, me telling the story about the saguaro, that's all AI. That's all AI. And that has profound power. And I know it's too poetic and counter-subversive to the demands of the market that says AI is what we get to swoon over. And I said, no, mama makes me swoon all the time. And she's been long gone, Anyway, it's for you, buddy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And we'll definitely be using that a lot. I thought maybe we can circle back to to belonging, because I think it's interesting to put belonging back into this conversation where we've been moving around lived experience and pedagogy and ancestor intelligence and all of these systems of knowledge and kinship that that produce worlds, right? But I think I'm thinking back to what you started with, Roberto, this question of belonging and relation. Um, and I don't, because I'm processing in real time, I don't have a fully formed question yet, but I'm wondering how you both think about belonging in relationship to what we've already been talking about, or other aspects of your practice that maybe we haven't spoken to yet.
I'll start off here with, because our cultural plan was called Belonging in Oakland. So what happens if you create a policy roadmap to operationalize belonging? That's a pretty heavy charge. Not heavy, it's just grandiose. So we've been doing it. But I want to make sure that when I use the term belonging, I am more a sociologist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a shrink. I can understand the politics of disbelonging, how it makes me feel uncomfortable. And we live in a racist nation. So the disbelonging that have been experienced by people of color in this community in our nation is profound. But those were policies. The Chinese Exclusionary Act, Japanese internment, reservations. These are all policies of disbelonging. But kinship kind of makes you strong and understand where you belong in the world. I belong on this piece of land. I belong in this body. I belong to a nation. So I, as a sociologist, am constantly thinking about policy as it relates to operationalizing belonging, and how do I create platforms for belonging through governance, not government, but governance. And so that's where I lean into that like a I don't know, like a vato loco. I don't know how I go into it. I go into it like a poet paladin. How about that?
How about you, Kate?
Well, I mean, to me, when I think about this, I think about outside, inside. People are born into a relation, a place, a power structure around place and relation, and people who aren't, who want access to it, and that's kind of the experience for about 70% of the American Indians who are alive in the United States today. We live outside of the boundaries of our reservations. And so when we go home, this question we are confronted with, like, how do we belong where our culture exists, our language exists, where our bodies were formed from the earth, our spirits ascended and descend over and over again there. How do we belong there? And what I think about, and I don't know if you can apply this to a broader system, but I really think about humility and ditching instant gratification, because the ego wants instant gratification, and the ego doesn't do well with belonging. Humility does. And I think about, and this is an academic thing, and I know many people have contributed to the shaping of this, and it can also be a trope or a cliche to mention this, so please forgive me, but I actually believe in these concepts. But belonging is actually dependent upon you being in relation with belonging. There, that has to be brought together and as one. And in relation, we need to respect that relation. We demonstrate our respect by being responsible to it, being accountable to it, and by engaging in that belonging through a spirit of reciprocity, so that the ego is subverted, the humility is brought up, because a lot of belonging isn't about being an individual. It's about being in and of the spirit of the thing that we're talking about. And so I think relevancy is what creates a platform for growing belonging, is belong in a way that is relevant to where you are in your position. Again, that goes against instant gratification. And then this idea of redistribution, it goes a little bit deeper than reciprocity. It's physically redistributing the resources of belonging to all parties involved, however you can do it, whether it's replacing medicine that's used, whether it's mowing lawns at ceremonial grounds for people, volunteering, bringing deer meat to a feast, when people haven't had deer meat for a while. You know, it's just things like that. To me, it's so human and so simple to be a part of. But if you want something out of it, it's not, that's going to just shut it all down.
Yeah. Yeah. I so when I listen to y'all, one thing that I really enjoy is like there's this bright sense of optimism, and there's like a deep mm, like kind of like an ethics, like an emergent ethics of relation, of belongings. You know, there's I can hear you all kind of sketching out this emergent ethics, for lack of a better way to say it at the moment. But I'm wondering about that, like when I think of that, and when I get carried by the current of y'all's thought in this moment and find myself drifting to like solidarity and mutual aid and politics of relation, you know, all this kind of stuff. But I want to think about that in relation to like dispossession and erasure and climate grief and anxiety and like all of these other things that I think are like are both the past and the future for all the communities that are in this room with us. And so I guess like that's kind of the question. You know, the original question that I was thinking about before our conversation started was a question about how we think about traditional knowledge in relationship to erasure, in enduring erasure and a horizon of erasure. But I wanna recognize, I guess, also that there's something like optimistic and hopeful and kind of beautiful in what y'all have brought to the table too. So I'm just wondering how y'all think about what is potentially a kind of cognitive dissonance in holding those things. Kate, why don't you start first?
Oh, this is a really interesting question, and how these questions have been building is I think really exceptional. So thank you about that. You know, I want to go back to this idea of pedagogy, and that pedagogy can come from family, community, your church, if you're a Christian type. It can come from the ceremonial grounds if you're a ceremonial grounds type. But participating in this sort of thing, like I think of conversations, I think of games, of dances and ceremonies that all give us hope, that light up our brains and bring into focus what's at stake. And that's a powerful experience. And we can embrace that, or we can turn our backs on it. It's challenging. We live in a realm of social media and instant gratification and things that take you further away from family, further away from place, further away from where you came from. And, you know, going and just as an observer or as a participant, just have that question on your mind is, what is going on with this family dynamic that is keeping continuity in a world of change? And that's been the mantra of tribal self-determination since the beginning, and tribal cultural self-determination is we've got to maintain continuity as everything disappears around us and is transformed into the worldview of our colonizers. So how that's what we did. We just dig deeper into the things where we can find continuity. And from what I understand, at its basis from a Cherokee worldview is being in communion We live our lives to prepare ourselves to be in communion with one another and with the land. And we have to work at it and practice it. Like there's a traditional medicine man, Crosland Smith, who recently passed away last year. And his vantage point was he didn't care how you practice being in communion. But if you lose being in communion, you will lose your connection to the past, present, and future. And you can practice that communion in a church if you have to. But you have to see the Spirit in a context that is much bigger than you. And you have to get away from the Enlightenment project way of, knowing, being, and doing, which is all about the individual and thinking of us as not, outside of the natural world, outside of being apex predators, things like that. So, and I think in terms of, so there's one way to maintain continuity is cultural practice. That's what it's designed for. That's what language does. That's human existence. We've developed these things specifically for those purposes. How do we address these things, the losses? We have to be vigilant. Policy. That's what public policy is for. Public policy is to organize and to try to mitigate destruction of these things. Can't give up on that. And I think at the end of the day, it's the practice. If you are absent, you're inviting loss. If you're present, you're inviting that generative spirit of survivance, of growth, of, reemergence. So I think those are the things that I get really caught up in. And in the Cherokee Nation, this is a huge issue because of the Supreme Court, the McCurt case, which reestablished the original reservation, re-acknowledged and reestablished our original reservation boundaries in Oklahoma for all the tribes that were removed. Particularly, this was a Creek case. It was specific to Creeks, but it's applicable to all of Indian country in Oklahoma. And so we're going to a place to where we now are going to be recapturing our self-determination over the land in a way we haven't been able to do in a long time. But at the same time, we have thousands and thousands of non-tribal occupants on our land who have built things, who have built economies, who have destroyed waters and rivers and, pumped the groundwater out and all that stuff. So this is the project. I mean, it's real. This is like, how do we transform loss and devastation into a place to where we can heal together? We can't heal as tribal people without non-tribal people healing with us. How do we set up a system to where we can listen and heal together, and a way to where, this is kind of a joke, but to where we can compel these non-tribal people to pay taxes on their, to the tribe rather than the state. Yeah. That's a powerful negotiation that is an important benchmark for the psychology of this dilemma. And so we're going to see this play out over 25 years, one day at a time. So these things you're right at the center of theory and practice with this. And that's the type of balance I really love about your questions and how you think. And of course, I think we both learned how to think like this through Roberto and our questions. So I view this as like Roberto teaching both of us, and we're grappling in the art world, like, let's do it. Let's model this, so it's really beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Roberto, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I have too much thoughts, but I want to hear from the audience. But a couple of things. Kade, you would love this. My friend Mark from Toledo, Ohio, talks about, he pointed out when people say the arts ecosystem, he goes, no, it's really the arts ecosystem. So when you go back to your academy, we always are dealing with these ecosystems. So anyway, but it is what it is. But I think about the pronoun we. I live my life around the pronoun we. And I think about the Jewish philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, who says we is not the plural of I. So it's a secular space. It's a ritual space. It is a space of ethics and aesthetics. It's a space of land and skies and heavens. It's all of that. So can we assert the platforms needed to understand we, not as a privatized me and my friend Trumpism, but realize we as ritual secular space? That's the homework assignment. And thank God I don't have to live a long life. But you kids could do it.
Well, thank you both. We're gonna briefly transition to audience Q&A, but before we do that, we're gonna look at a couple of pictures of the exhibition and then we'll answer some questions from the audience.
Ooh, I could listen to you talk for another hour. Thank you so much. And there's been quite the chatter going on in the Q&A. So I just want to thank you, Roberto, Anthony, and Kade for this great conversation. And I am going to go into some of these questions, which I've sort of synthesized because there seem to be similar threads. So thank you, audience. You've definitely been paying attention. I suppose I want to start with Anthony because we've just seen that slideshow. So Anthony, is there an artwork in the exhibition that you want to describe as being informed by some of this conversation? And another person said, can you articulate your idea of creating platforms for belonging? Because I think that really wraps in some of our discussion and how this concept might relate to the exhibition in the Radcliffe Gallery.
Yeah, I think I can weave them both together. And actually it was from a conversation I was having with Abby Satinsky, my wife, last night, because, and in the context, maybe just to the point about the art world, in the context of like working on an application and not having enough space to kind of articulate how the work emerges. But in particular, I think with this exhibition, when you come to the exhibition, you'll see an installation, and that installation has a set of sculptures and objects that might have forms that are familiar to you or relatable to you, or use materials that you might have some relationship to. But I think it's actually how that work came to be, which is so much a part of this conversation and a part of this for me, an aspect of maybe platforming that sense of belonging, right? Because the work really comes from like Josh and Deanna working together, of course, on the one hand, but it also comes from like directly from our families. You know, it comes from Josh and Deanna traveling the hill country with their families and listening to their stories that uncles and aunts and moms are telling them, and that becoming part of the exhibition. You know, it's me talking to my dad about where he picked wild plums and wild onions and what it was like to live on a plot of land with his great grandparents as they farmed all the time. You know, like all of these things turn into the forms that you see in the show. So for me, it's really like the show is a work, and it's really informed out of these networks.
Yeah, I see that, Anthony, and I think I told you last week when we were installing how excited I was to have audiences come in and to hear the stories that these particular objects will come from them, how they will interpret something like gravel next to the flowers, that sort of thing. So thank you for that. I am going to go to a question for Kade that I've also synthesized from a few questions. So you mentioned the importance of kin in pedagogical, ceremonial, cultural, and familial practices. Can you link that to your ideas of humility and being in communion? I found, and some other people found, this connection that is both family-based as well as these larger cultural projects really interesting, and would like to hear a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think from the point I'm getting at, I think, is participating.
Mhm.
If you participate actively, sincerely in these family instances, like instead of saying, I hate my parents at Thanksgiving, like dig in and try to figure out where your parents are coming from, research their histories, ask them 50 questions that are critical to your worldview, and you might find out that your worldview sits right in theirs. But also these spiritual exercises, cultural exercises like games, ceremonies, dances, and things, they're disciplining you.
Right.
They physically discipline you to bridge that gap and to exist in that space. So that's the participatory aspect of this versus theory you think and read, versus the experiential you embody, you participate. Yeah, that's probably it. It's that simple.
That's a great answer to a very complex question, because I know that artists, and I know that this was happening in the gallery while we were like putting things together. It's like, oh, this relationship is here, but we literally had to use our bodies in order to situate the artwork in the gallery and then to place items here and there. So thank you so much for that. And I have a question for Roberto. Someone says, I love the kinship budget and troubling it, and I'm interested in how policy works toward a possibility of a kinship budget. I think this is something artists and cultural workers understand. Can you draw that out a little more? Because I really think you're doing, in this questionnaire, is like putting these two things together.
Okay, I'll respond to that. And then I saw a question here. I want to speak to Anthony a little bit. You know, I'm a policy wonk. I do cultural policy. And you have to start off with the culture is fluid and policy aims to fix. So you got to learn how to work with those two energies. So I tell the artists, you have that one line called other. Go use it. Start making your argument, because policy will follow the imagination of the person. the artists. So my job is to constantly rewrite my guidelines. I have to rewrite my guidelines once a year. Well, let's put in a line item called kinship. Oh, what the hell do you mean? I put in my narrative now. I ask the questions. How do you operate? I ask about belonging. So now it's part of a civic discourse. When you're knocking on the door of Oakland, you have to talk about belonging. Don't be afraid about philanthropy and technocrats, because they really run a lot of crap. And they're human beings, and they have spirits, and they have curiosities. And so you just need to be subversive. But so that's my, how do you?
I'm going to use that other category. And
I guess what I will like to say before I go someplace else, artists, you have agency. You have the ultimate agency. Even though philanthropy may be slow, you are the leading edge. You are always out of guidelines. That's the nature of your spirit. And so you just got to go there. You got to honor your spirit, and you got to bring that to the table and let cats like me and other dudes and dudettes figure out how to validate that. Now, there was a question here from my colleague, John, about risquache, which is, and at the very beginning, before we got on the webinar, I was teasing Anthony because that image of the inner tube and the pebbles, I said, that's total risquache. Risquache meaning, how do you make beauty out of nothing?
Yeah.
And so it is a survival. People want beauty. I saw that. I go, that's beautiful. And I know exactly what the fuck that is. It's like an inner tube in a river and there's pebbles. I get it. Can you make an object out of it? Of course. Do you have to go to art school? No, but maybe you did, Anthony. But it's to me, it's about the risquache aesthetic, about how do you create beauty out of odd objects. Okay, that was my answer to John Winnett.
Thank you, Roberto. And I think this is a really great way to, unfortunately, we have to close out this conversation. I really want to talk another hour. But I want to thank Anthony and Roberto and Kade for your thoughtful conversation, and definitely our audience for the terrific questions. And I want to thank Radcliffe's exhibition team and Caitlin Rubin for your care and expertise with the exhibition. I also want to remind our audience that registration to visit the place where the creek goes underground is now open and can be accessed through the Radcliffe website, radcliffe.harvard.edu. It's free and open to the public Monday through Saturday, noon to 4:30 p.m. from now through December 14th. And I also want to pitch to those teaching artists locally that I am happy to lead a tour with your classes. So there's also a button that you can sign up there. And we invite you to join us for an in-person book release with Anthony, Deanna, and Josh Rios on November 14th. Hi, I saw your message. I'm glad you enjoyed our conversation. This event is going to be part of Harvard's Arts Thursday programming, and registration can be found on our website. And finally, today's program has been recorded and will be posted in about a week. And for information about upcoming Radcliffe programs and to see videos of past events, please visit radcliffe.harvard.edu. And again, a sincere thank you again for joining us today, and take care.